Good morning, everybody. Today, my session will be on neuropsychology perspective of language systems. Now, this class is prepared for MPhil clinical psychology trainees and for the speech therapy students. Now, when we talk or discuss about language system, which are the two main brain areas which comes to our minds? Yes, that is Broca's area and Wernicke's area. But are both the areas situated in the same lobe of the brain, or is it situated in different lobes of the brain? If the two areas are in different parts of the lobe, how is it connected? Because one area, that is Broca's areas, is involved in expressive speech, and the other area, Wernicke's area, is uh, involved in comprehension aspects of the speech and language. So both are interconnected. Then, is it only the cortical areas involved in language processing, or is other parts of the brain, the subcortical areas, are also involved in the language system? So these are the things which we are going to discuss in today's session. Now, temporal lobe. We are going to see temporal lobe because the most important area, the auditory cortex, is situated in the temporal lobe. Higher auditing processing. So, speaking is the ability to differentiate between speech sounds, phonemes, vowels, consonants. One should be able to understand and articulate words in a spoken manner. Now, when we say differentiate between speech sounds, that is phonemes, what is a phoneme? It's a word sound, syllable, like a, a. Instead of saying a, apple, we are going to say a, p, l. So A stands for a, P stands for p, L stands for l. Vowels. What are the 5 vowels? Again, A, E, I, O, U. So you have long vowel sounds, short vowel sounds. Articulate words in spoken manner. So you can observe in some children, they will have difficulty in producing certain sounds. Like for example, they'll have difficulty for saying ra. So instead of ra, they can substitute that in a more similar simple sounds where the tongue movement will be little less difficult. Same way for sha, sa, then la. So these sounds, they have difficulty in articulating, and they can substitute that for other simple sounds. Now, here we are also going to discuss about language development. So, what does language require? Language requires putting meaning to words fragments, word semantics. So only when you know the meaning of the word, you will be able to use that word according to the appropriate situation. Then comes the syntax and grammatical rules. This is important for forming a sentence and how to put strings of words into a meaningful sentences. So you'll have lot of words: money, work, men. These are individual words. How you are going to put these words in making into a meaningful sentences? Now, language development is based on the following: phoneme. What is a phoneme? It's the smallest group of sounds in language. As I told you, k, m, p, ta, la, d are phonemes. One of the principal tasks in learning a language is to distinguish between p and b in peach and beach. A person who has difficulty in discriminating between sounds will have difficulty in understanding spoken language. I hope you understood this point clearly. So, one should be able to differentiate between two sounds. Luria in 1973 explains that when a patient is not able to differentiate between phonemes, he will have difficulty in understanding spoken words of his own language. His mother tongue will resemble like a foreign language for that patient. Patient's basic difficulty lies in auditory discrimination. They depend of they are deprived of regulating their own speech. Patients are not aware of their defective speech and hence they don't feel necessary to connect. So this happens when you have seen a patient with Wernicke's aphasia. In Wernicke's aphasia patient, there will be lot of irrelevant talk, but they are not aware of their own talk. Because of it, they will find it difficult to correct themselves, or even when we insist for therapy, they might not cooperate. Now, patients who have difficulty to produce a word to name objects, clue or prompt will not help them or of no use, as they are unable to fit the word into the phonic system. So, structural language disappears and is replaced as a fragmented speech, that is, utterance of words called as word salad. So, Luria, 1973, when patients cannot differentiate the differences in acoustic content of words, they will have difficulty to write material when it is dictated, but they can copy the word or a verbal material when presented visually. So, when you give a book and ask them to copy from the book or from the blackboard, they will be able to do it. But if you ask them to dictate, if you dictate a list of words on dictation, they will not be able to write. Why do you think so? Because when you have to write while dictation, you need to know the phonism. Only then you will be able to guess the letter you have to write for that particular sound of the word. But there can be an exception to write words which they are so familiar that they no longer need analysis of acoustic content of the word. Now, for example, name, signature of the person, and other words which they use in trade and profession every day. These words has been convert these words. So this conversion of these words into a motor stereotypes. So these words have got converted into motor stereotypes. So Luria and the colleagues pointed out this as an example as to how cerebral organization process change over time. So the motor aspects of writing of words becomes automatic more and more with use and less dependent upon auditory discrimination. So, the more and more you practice these words in your everyday life, what happens? It gets your spelling gets into your remote your so what happens is this automatically gets converted into your motor stereotypes. So that writing of a familiar word, so writing of a familiar words comes to have a different neuronal or cerebral organization. This brings to our understanding and knowledge that lesions in different area will have different effects. So, a careful qualitative analysis about the nature of errors patient makes. In this case, the patient has difficulty in certain words and not in other words. So this will point out more precisely the localization of lesion. Now, when we come to the hemispheres, left hemisphere. How many hemispheres do we have? We have two hemispheres, left and right hemisphere. Now we will look into the functions of the left and right hemisphere. So damage to left hemisphere auditory processing area result in partial and inability in spoken language. Lesions in the left hemisphere lesions in left hemisphere in the posterior temporal lobe sometimes leads to the difficulty in using words to name object, but patient perceives the significance of the objects and the use of the function. So, but what the function which is preserved? So, this patient can still continue to recognize the emotional tone. So, when a patient talks in anger tone or when the patient speaks in the jovial tone, they are able to recognize the emotional aspect of the patient. Or they may ask, why are you getting angry? Now, we'll now see into what happens in the right hemisphere. Right hemisphere damaged patient leads to the impairment of melodic abilities. Lack of ability to appreciate musical tunes can also lose the emotional intention in the spoken language. So, the emotional aspect, they will have difficulty to perceive the emotionality when the other people talk to them. So, another case I can give a case of example where this patient had difficulty in discriminating between the sounds and how this has affected in her everyday life is what we are going to see in this case. So this patient who had a right hemisphere damage had to replace the car started repeatedly in her car as she could not differentiate the sound between the starter and once the engine is turned on. So she could not differentiate once the engine is started, her the sound of the starter and the engine. So this is an example how it can affect in everyday lives. Now let me go to the next thing called the very important area which you are going to involve is expressive speech like Broca's. Now look at where Broca's area is situated. So the Broca's areas is situated here where Brodmann's area 44 and 45. So expressive lesions in Broca's areas can lead to expressive aphasia. Now, the other name for the Broca's area is frontal operculum. frontal operculum bruchus, located in the left frontal lobe of the posterior portion of the third frontal gyrus, inferior frontal gyrus. So this area is adjacent to the facial area of the motor cortex. So inferior motor gyrus is the premotor area of the frontal lobe. So this area is concerned with speech planning, speech output, so speech output is coordinated by the motor strip. So this area is concerned with speech planning and speech output is coordinated by the motor strip of the brain. Now we'll see what is motor strip does. So when you look at the diagram of it, so this motor strip is also known, this motor strip is also known as the precentral gyrus. It is a long, narrow area in the brain. So look at the shape of it. It is a long, narrow area in the frontal lobe. And see where it is situated. It is situated in the anterior central gyrus and runs down parallel to central gyrus. So you look at it, middle frontal gyrus, posterior central gyrus. See, look at the central gyrus here. So this from motor strip is parallel to the central gyrus, and here it is supratemporal gyrus. So it is situated in the middle of the frontal and temporal gyrus. So motor strips. Now we will look into what does motor strip does. What is the motor strip does? So the main function of the motor strip is it controls the body movements and motor strips in the left side controls the right side of the body and vice versa. So motor strips of the right side controls the left side of the body. So the most striking aspect of the motor strip is that the area assigned according to the complexity of the movement, not according to the area of the body. So this is one of the most striking aspect of the motor strip is that the areas assigned according to the complexity of the movements. So the two distinct human faculties are the ability to use tools and ability to speak. So here comes the involvement of the language, the role of motor strip in the ability to speak. So when we are speaking, we are using motor movements of our mouth and tongue. So lips, mouth and tongue are involved in the motor movement of it. So this is what the motor strip of the function is. Now let us go to the next. Broca's area. So Broca's area play a role in mediating the fluency of speech and grammatical and syntaxical arrangement of words. Yeah, the whole other important area which we have come is Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe. So in temporal lobe, in the Wernicke's area, there are two aspects. One is A1 and A2. This is A1, the blue shaded area A1. This is called the primary auditory cortex. The primary auditory cortex. And the pink shaded A2 is secondary auditory cortex. Secondary auditory cortex. Now, what happens in primary auditory and secondary auditory cortex? Now, in primary auditory cortex, it mainly, look at it, it is only sounds and herds. Herds, it is marked. So, when you're speaking, the sound of your words are received by primary auditory cortex as the herds of the sound, and this is converted as words in the secondary auditory cortex. So the noise, the features of the sound are received by the primary cortex, and once it is received, it is processed in the secondary auditory cortex. The meaning of the sound gets converted into a word which is already stored in the cortex. So, after the primary auditory cortex processes sound features, they are integrated into understandable speech sounds, and this is carried out in secondary processing area which is called as Wernicke's area. Now, Wernicke's area. When you look into it, there are two small shaded places. This one and this one. So, this is pointing out to Wernicke's area, and this is pointed out to the Broca's area. So, what happens in the Wernicke's area? So, the secondary auditory processing area, that is A2, connect the sound received from A1, that is the primary processing area, to the word meaning that is stored in the cortex. So, this is the intermediate step to understand language. In addition to that, cortical processing area integrate the individual words to grammatical phrase or sentence. So the spoken language gets converted into written symbols of language which is necessary to the reading comprehension. So look at various aspects in the speech and language. Receiving sound, the sound gets converted to a meaning of the word in the secondary processing area, that is A2, which is a very important step, intermediate step in understanding language. Then in addition to that, these words which you are understanding is put into a grammatical phrase or sentence. And once a sentence is formed, you speak that in the sentence, and also these words are integrated into written symbols of the language, which is necessary to the reading comprehension. The vernix area is closely integrated with the supramarginal and angular gyrus of the inferior parietal lobe. The angular gyrus plays a very important role in reading comprehension, match words and word sounds to the written symbol of the language. Now, this is what the first thing which I discussed. What connects between Broca's area and Wernicke's area? It's a white band of white matter fibers. So it is a band of white matter fibers which connects the Broca's and Wernicke's. So the red shaded area is Broca's, the green shaded area is Wernicke's. And see the red bands which is going from Broca's to Wernicke's. And this is referred to as band of white fibers and is called as arcuate fasciculus. Arcuate fasciculus is a band of white matters which connects Broca's and Wernicke's area. So Broca's Broadband area, Broca's is for expression, Wernicke's is for auditory registration and auditory comprehension. Now, so this arcuate fasciculus is a band of white matter fibers, so which connects the Wernicke's and the Broca's area, allows communication between Wernicke's and Broca's area. So Wernicke's area picks up words for meaning either from the external source or self. In parallel, the syntax of the phrase is constructed in Broca's. Look at the micro milliseconds in the brain, how it functions. And it happens parallelly, the function of the Broca's and the function of the Wernicke's. This happens because of the reciprocal interaction between the two areas, Broca's and Wernicke's. And how this reciprocal interaction happens is because of the arcuate fasciculus, which is a band of white matter fibers which connects the Broca's and the Wernicke's area. Now, Now we are going to talk about the role of basal ganglia and thalamus in language processing. So when you look at this drawing, we are going to talk about the cortico striato pallido thalamo cortical loops, which is in the subcortical region. And this subcortical region is also involved in language processing. So when you look at this drawing, it's a basal ganglia. So this a color with shaded light blue, where you have putamen. Putamen is involved in rhythm modulation in the language. Then you have globus pallidus. Globus pallidus. Then we'll go here to see this one is in arcade fasciculus. This is important. Caudate nucleus. The nucleus. Caudate nucleus. So this caudate nucleus mine is the articulate of the motor functioning. Then you have the thalamus. See small features. Thalamus is again a small feature. Integration of phonetical, morphological, synthetic and semantic information is the role of thalamus. So these are the subcortical regions which is involved in the language processing area. So now we'll see these loops. How does this loop gets connected and to language system, and what role do they play? So this is called cortico-striato-pallido-thalamo-cortical loop. It's a set of loops connects the language cortex of the putamen and the caudate nucleus of the striatum to the global pallidus to specific model in the thalamus and back to the cortical language centers. So this is connected to the cortical language centers. And what are the cortical language centers? Is Broca's and Wernicke's. So these subcortical areas are connected to the cortical language systems, that is the Broca's and the Wernicke's area. Now, the function of this loop is more in language production than in speech construction. So the numerous language deficits observed in patients with basal ganglia lesions and Parkinsonism suggest that basal ganglia contributes to language production. Now, basal ganglia are involved in the motor chunking of motor chunking, and this process is carried out by dopamine dependent. So chunking is a key mechanism in sequence learning, and it comprises two distinct processes occurring at different stages. Now for example, when you chunk, now this chunking process is used when we have to remember mobile numbers. There are 10 numbers. So you group the numbers either 5, 5 or 3, 3, 4. Same way in the words, for example, environment. So you break the word into 3 sounds. That becomes a chunk. So when you are teaching children to read big words, you break that word. Now for example, plant. Plant. So pl, pla, an, t. So you're splitting it, then you completely say. So there is chunking process happening. So which otherwise also we say in English teaching phonetic system, blend sounds. Pl, you say pla. So you call this as blend sounds when you are teaching phonetic training. When the teachers are giving phonetic training, they call this as blend sounds, which is similar to chunking process. So the first operation called chunking, and this is followed by concatenation. What does it mean? It means that which consists of assembling these short chunks into long cluster. So the initial segment, so I'll make a word. Now I said pla and t. So there are 3 chunks. You combine the chunk and say plant. So you're clustering the chunks and to make a word. So this is called concatenation process. And the initial segmentation rely on a left frontoparietal network including Broca's. And the second function is carried out by the basal ganglia according to the motivational aspect of it. Now, only when you're hungry, you'll say, Mummy, I am hungry, or you'll say, I need to eat something. Give me biscuits. So, based on the motivation aspect, is what your relevant speech appears. So, the syntax and sequence processing of Broca's is tightly interconnected with basal ganglia. Is interconnected with basal ganglia. Now, in conclusion, we are going to conclude this session where speech and language functions are lateralized beyond the cortical area, such as Broca's and Wernicke's language, requires so language requires thought and has extensive interconnection to higher order planning and memory cortex. The secondary cortex gives evidence for lateralized specialization. So the hemisphere dominant for speech is concerned with analysis of speech sounds, and non-dominant hemisphere is concerned with the non-verbal material and the emotional tone, and also includes music. So the participation of specialization is what Luria terms as law of progressive lateralization and forms an important aspect for cerebral asymmetry. So the supramarginal gyrus and the angular gyrus of the parietal lobe are important in integrating the verbal aspects of the language with the visual symbolic components involved in reading. The subcortical neuronal connection in basal ganglia and the thalamus also play a role. Hence, cerebral lateralization exists for various language functions. So, language is not localized to only one or two areas of the cortical areas, but it is lateralized from right hemisphere, left hemisphere, the cortical areas of Broca's and Wernicke's connected to the subcortical areas in the basal ganglia. Now, the reference used for this class is Neuropsychology book, A Clinical Approach, 5th edition, Walsh. Then contribution of the basal ganglia to spoken language. Is speech prediction like the other motor skills, which is published in Brain, Behavioral and Brain Sciences. Then Principles of Neuropsychology, 2nd edition, Zilmer, Spy and Culbertson. So, before I tell you thank you, I would like to give an assignment for the students. Work on this area, only then you will complete the temporal lobe and language systems. Explain double dissociation function of temporal lobe with experiments and how these findings can have a practical application in diagnosis, diagotic listening studies, types of aphasia, its anatomical, clinical picture, and how to evaluate from a neuropsychology perspective. So work on these assignments. Only then your reading for the language systems and the temporal lobe will get completed. So I again thank you all.